life free of the intoxication of elation and despondency. He offers you a life free of the fear of fading away. He offers you a life free of the despondency and the drunkenness of a life lived asleep and unaware of what God has for you. Jesus Christ invites you to finally, even at this last hour of your life, finally wake up. And He gives you this entire week to wake up. He gives you this entire week to wake up. We're going to walk with Jesus Christ this week, my angels. We're going to live the last week of Jesus' life together. We're not going to miss a moment. I hope you're here. And I hope you allow the grace of Jesus Christ lived in this week to stir your life towards reality and not the delusion of fading into darkness. The church offers you something greater than disappearing. I pray for Stephen Hawking. I pray for you. This week, instead of darkness, my angels, step into the light. Amen.
Father Barnabas is the priest at the Saints Raphael, Nicholas, and Irene Greek Orthodox Church in Cumming, Georgia. Find out more at faithencouraged.org. That's faithencouraged.org.
Orthodox music, lectures, prayers, and more on Ancient Faith Radio. Thanks for your support.
This is Ancient Faith Today with Father Tom Soroka, a weekly live call-in show addressing the issues of our day from a distinctly Orthodox perspective. You can join the conversation by calling in at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO. Father Tom is the priest at St. Nicholas Orthodox Church in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and welcomes guests from across the globe to discuss important topics of interest. Here's Father Tom.
Welcome to Ancient Faith Today. This is Father Tom Soroka, and I'm so glad that you're with us this evening. We'll be taking your calls in a bit at 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. Trudy will be answering your calls tonight, so please make sure to turn the show volume off before you come on air. To participate online, we encourage you to go either to the AFR Facebook page at facebook.com/ancientfaithradio and place a question there in the thread for tonight's show, where it is now being live simulcast, or you can also go to facebook.com/ancientfaithtoday and place your question there in the thread for tonight's show. You can also send us an email at aft@ancientfaith.com. So let's get started. As we Orthodox Christians continue our journey through Holy Week to accompany our Lord Jesus Christ to His passion, His cross, His burial, and His resurrection, I have been doing some Lenten reading, and one of the books that I am reading during this great Lenten season and have finished is a wonderful book written by our guest this evening called Things Worth Dying For. Our guest this evening is the Most Reverend Charles Chaput, the Archbishop Emeritus of Philadelphia. Archbishop Chaput earned a Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy from St. Fidelis College Seminary in Herman, Pennsylvania. He also completed studies in psychology at Catholic University in Washington, D.C. He earned a Master of Arts in Religious Education and was ordained to the priesthood on August 29th, 1970. He also received a Master of Arts in Theology from the University of San Francisco. He was an instructor in theology and spiritual director at St. Fidelis, and he was also the executive director of communications for the Capuchin province of St. Augustine in Pittsburgh from 1974 to 1977. Later, he was ordained the Bishop of Rapid City, South Dakota. Then he went on to be the Archbishop of Denver, finally being given the see of Philadelphia. He recently retired at the end of 2020, and we are very, very honored to have him here this evening. Archbishop Chaput is also the author of many wonderful books, such as A Heart on Fire, Render unto Caesar, and then finally his latest book, Things Worth Dying For. So I'm honored this evening to welcome the Most Reverend Archbishop Chaput, Emeritus Archbishop of Philadelphia. Your Excellency, welcome to Ancient Faith Today.
Thank you very much, Father Tom. I'm very honored that you asked me to be part of your program.
Well, I have become a fan of yours, and you have many, many fans. And I found your book to be absolutely fascinating and captivating, very relevant, as they say today. And I'm really looking forward to discussing some of these points with you, because I feel that the message of the book is so important for us to discuss. And so thank you very much for taking time to discuss this with us this evening. And I also want to say, if we have Roman Catholic listeners this evening, welcome. We're honored to have you, and we hope that you'll join into the discussion. You're certainly welcome to call in. And the number you heard at the beginning of the show, 1-855-AF-Radio. Your Excellency, tell us a little bit about yourself and your upbringing. We talked a little bit about your education. How did you actually come to be ordained to the episcopacy?
Well, before actually doing that, I'd like to talk about my relationship with the Orthodox community. It's not a very...
I would love to hear that.
It's not a very deep relationship, because I was born in Kansas and grew up there, and I don't think I met Archbishop of Denver many years ago already. I became a very good friend of the Metropolitan Isaiah, who was the Bishop of the Denver Diocese of the Greek Orthodox Church. And he and I are still very good friends. I had to retire when I was 75, because that's our canon law, but I think Metropolitan Isaiah will go on forever and ever and ever. So it's a difference. But I'm very fond of him, and I'm very, very grateful for the Orthodox community and also for the Eastern Catholic communities in the church today.
Absolutely. And I might also say that he is highly regarded, Metropolitan Isaiah, as one who upholds traditional values and traditional ways of orthodoxy and Christian doctrine. And I know that you certainly are in that frame of reference also. So thank you very much for bringing that up. So tell me a little bit about how you came to be a Catholic bishop.
Well, I grew up in Kansas, as I said, and went to school in Western Pennsylvania, and then eventually entered the Capuchin Order and did a novitiate year in Annapolis, Maryland, and then theology in Washington, D.C. And that was followed by some years as spiritual director at the seminary in Herman, and then director of communications, like you said, in Pittsburgh at St. Augustine's in Lawrenceville. And then our province of the Capuchins divided into two parts, the eastern part and the western part. And since my home was in Kansas, I joined the West and did ministry in Denver. And, in my young years as a priest, I became involved in Native American ministry because my mother is a Potawatomi Indian, or was a Potawatomi Indian. She's been dead for a number of years now. And because of my interest in Native American ministry, I was noticed when the Roman Catholic Church decided that they need to do some affirmative action in terms of appointing bishops, and it was that really was being done This is back
Sure.
in 1988 that I became a bishop. They were making Hispanic bishops and African American bishops, and they needed some American Indians. And since I was involved in Native American ministry, I was noticed. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have been noticed because I was a member of a religious order in the Latin Rite tradition. Religious order priests don't ordinarily become bishops. I know it's just the opposite in Eastern Orthodoxy. And so when the Diocese of Rapid City, South Dakota opened up, because they have 5 Indian reservations there, I was appointed the Bishop of Rapid City, where I served happily for 9 years. And then Pope John Paul II transferred me to be the Archbishop of Denver. I was there for 14 years, and then I came east to Philadelphia 10 years ago. So
really amazing.
Why did you become a bishop? I said, my grandmother was an Indian.
Honestly, I think you're being much too humble. I think that from everything that I've read, honestly, you are a wonderful example of a Christian leader, and I know that you're very interested in the topic of leadership. And so there's so many things that your flock, your various dioceses, I'm sure, have gained from your leadership. And again, thank you very much for joining us this evening. So let's talk a little bit about your book.
Father, really, it is true, though. I became a bishop because my grandmother was an Indian. And that's not why I became the Archbishop of Denver or came to Philadelphia, but that's how I got noticed. So you never know why those things happen. God uses his providence to make decisions that have consequences in our lives.
Indeed. I'm curious, are there a lot of Native Americans that are also Catholic?
Well, about 25% of the Indian community in the United States would be Catholic. 24%, I think it is. But that's, there's only 3 million American Indians in North America. Well, I should say that in the United States. There's more in Canada, but and so it's not a very large community, but about 25%.
Amazing. Very good. All right, so your book, Things Worth Dying For, Thoughts on a Life Worth Living. What prompted you to write this book?
Well, I'm always very honest in giving my answers. My publisher asked me to do it. I've had some success in writing books.
You have.
The one that was just previous to this was called Strangers in a Strange Land, and it did very well. And so the publisher asked me to do another one and said, why don't you do something when you retire? I think he was hoping I would do something more autobiographical, but I didn't want to do that. And so the publisher's name is Henry Holt, and so the originating point of this book was really being shoved by the publisher, but I got into it because I had a few more things to say before I die, and this is certainly going to be my last book. I'm not going to do another one. I've said that before, but I really mean it this time. And what it is a reflection on the foundational things that those of us who follow Jesus should be committed to. I mean, I asked a question in the beginning when I started writing the book: what is it that I love more than life? And who am I willing to die for? Right. What am I willing to die for? And I think the answer to those questions, if we're honest, tells us how we're living our lives. And some of us are living for the wrong reasons. And some of us say we would die for the important things for Christians, but it'd be much harder for us to actually do it if our life was on the line. But I think it's a great exercise, not only at the end of one's life, like I'm towards the end of my life. I'm certainly not going to live longer than I've lived already. It's really important to make regular reviews of one's life to see what you're really living for.
It is fascinating because I believe that the question that you're asking here, what is worth dying for, is a question that especially today is not asked enough. I think that people are living for entertainment, they're living for pleasure, and they're not lifting the meaning of their life toward a higher goal. And even the actual question that you're asking, I think, really will be very thought-provoking to people, and I think that's the great value of this book. So you obviously have said that you're retired and you are looking toward the end of your life. You are looking back in the past life. Tell me about the past. In other words, you've obviously seen a lot of things change in American society. You've seen things change in your own dioceses, in the church, the Catholic Church, the Orthodox Church, and so forth. If you had to describe to someone how are things different today than when you first became a priest, or even before that, when you were a child, how would you say things are different today than when they were before?
Hugely different on every level of life. I grew up in a very simple community of just 7,000 people in Concordia, Kansas. And I was born in 1944. I'm 76 years old. And, back in those days, the Second World War was ended and Korean War had ended. And we were in a period of peace and stability. And the values that were foundational for the establishment of our country, the Constitution is built on, were really part of the fabric of everyone's day-to-day living out in north central Kansas, at least. I'm sure it was true also in most parts of our country. So it was just a much more peaceful time. And the Judeo-Christian tradition really was a foundational moral point of view of everybody in the country. Whether they personally believed it or not, everyone at least acted like they believed it. And I think most people sincerely did try to live by, the Ten Commandments and the general perspective on the meaning of life and culture that Christians have. I, of course, grew into adulthood during the 60s, the sexual revolution, and the turmoil that came to our country because of the Vietnam War. And things changed just hugely. I think the sexual revolution was the source of so many problems in our country, and it is still continuing to show its effects in our time. In terms of the Roman Catholic Church, about 75% of people went to Mass every Sunday. We have a Sunday Mass obligation in the Roman Catholic tradition, and about 75% of people went to Mass on Sunday. Sometimes they went just out of custom and were forced to by their wife or somebody else, I guess. But they went, and we were always proud that we were much more faithful about going to church than our Protestant brothers and sisters. Now, things have changed hugely. I think the most recent studies I show that somewhere between 25 and 30% of Roman Catholics go to Mass every Sunday. That was before the pandemic, and I think it's going to be much worse after we get this all sorted out, in terms of the drop. So it's just a huge drop. Back in those days, if you ran for president, it was dangerous to be divorced. You certainly had to serve in the military. You wouldn't even consider being a candidate for president. There was a greater sense of patriotism. Divorce was frowned upon. Stable family life was expected. Homosexuality was not talked about even, let alone praised and embraced in a public kind of way. All those things are so different today. We have much more instability in our family life. The Judeo-Christian tradition is mocked and attacked by the elites of our society. There's patriotism is under suspicion. It's seen as militarism by some people today, and we have all kinds of ideologies that are not compatible with Christianity. But I think the biggest difference, of course, is family life. Family life is not nearly as stable as it was.
Right.
And it's redefined, actually. What is a family today? You don't dare define it as one man and one woman together for life for the sake of children.
Right.
It's considered to be a primitive view of what family life is, and I think everything runs with the family. So when we undermine the traditional Christian understanding of family life, things really do fall apart and change significantly.
Yeah, it's fascinating because I think our detractors would say that, well, this is progress. We're making progress. We're being more permissive and more engaging to others and so forth. But I think your book clearly shows the pitfalls of this approach, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. So, beginning with the premise of your book, Your Excellency, you say this: it is a good thing, a vital thing, to ask what we're willing to die for. What do we love more than life? So you make the statement, and you alluded to it before. Help unpack this for us. Why is it necessary for there to be something that we love more than our own life? And what is it about today's values that puts one's own life above everything else?
You know, I'm always speaking out of the Roman Catholic Latin experience, so I don't know that some of the images I use are very useful to your faith community. But you know, in our tradition, we had a custom of when I was a young boy, of having holy cards, which were pictures of saints, and we carried them around with us in our prayer books, but also in our pockets. And a common picture of saints in those days was a saint holding a skull in his hand, or writing on a desk with the skull sitting on the desk. And it was a reminder to us that life's going to end, and we ought to be living our life with one eye on that future. You know, not just the future of this life, but the future of real life, which comes after our death, when we begin to share in the resurrection of Jesus Christ in a concrete, real way. You know, outside of the sacramental life of our church and the life of grace. And you know, we were always taught that at the end of it all, there's four last things: judgment, death, judgment, and heaven or hell. And we would live our lives differently if we took those four last things seriously and thought about them, and let that thinking inform the way we lived our life now. And I think that's really true. You know, you're celebrating Holy Week this week, and we're entering into that mystery every year with awareness that you know, Jesus is the one who leads us through death to resurrection life, and that's the future that God wants for all of us. You know, and He thought we were worth dying for, and you know, the way we should live our life is live life as He lived it, and prepare for the life that's eternal, which is coming, and is much, you know, eternal is much longer than 80 years. So it really does make a difference if we live our life with one eye on heaven. You know, when we're on our deathbed, we're not going to be thinking about how much money we made or how successful we were or how popular we were. We're going to be thinking about what's next. And so living our life now so that what's next is a natural step for us is an important kind of thing. You know, we yes. Christians in the Orthodox and the Catholic tradition believe that our future is in eternities dependent on how we live our lives now. We're making ourselves the kind of people that are able to embrace God's friendship or reject God's friendship after we die. So it's really to ask those questions. So what do I think is worth living for? It really does reveal who we are, and is an important reflection in terms of determining how we're going to live our lives in the future.
Indeed, and it is no coincidence, I would say, to be perfectly honest. At many of our Orthodox Christians are at church tonight. They're going to this, what we call the bridegroom matin service, and the gospel reading for this evening, Your Excellency, is from John chapter 12, and it's where Jesus, finally says that he's going to be glorified. Now the hour has come that the Son of Man should be glorified. And then he says, I lost my place here. He says, he who loves his life will lose it, and he who hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life. In other words, he's saying that, there is something even greater than your own life. And I think so often we're missing the point in this particular gospel reading. We're missing that challenge of the Lord, who is going to his voluntary death, who is giving up his life for the life of the world, and saying this is the real way to human life and divine life, is to actually have something else worth dying for. So I'm thrilled that you put that question out there as really the basis of your book, because I think it's at the very heart of the gospel. 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. If you have a question for Archbishop Chaput, please feel free to call in. Your Excellency. Yeah, absolutely.
Questions. So,
absolutely.
It's really a strange kind of thing. When I was a kid, I always asked myself, why does it give glory to God? Or why is the Father giving glory to the Son in the crucifixion? But I've come to understand that what glorifies God is sacrifice, because that's what God is. The Trinity is one act of self-giving, the Father to the Son, and the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit giving love to the other persons of the Holy Trinity. And we're made in the image and likeness of God, so we're made for sacrifice. That's what gives glory to God. And so Jesus really showed us that in the fullest way by dying for us on the cross. And the result of that self-giving, of course, is resurrection. And we have much to look forward to.
And you speak about this later on in your book when you talk about the lack of even patriotism, or people maybe unwilling to defend their country, through going to war, whatever. I mean, I think that idea of having something, obviously the greatest thing is God himself and the worship of God, but also something greater than yourself, even if it is love of country, love of family. These things should lift us out of ourselves in a certain sense. Your Excellency, I posted this quote, and I think, honestly, it's probably one of the best quotes from your book. And it says, "The fear of martyrdom is the start of an honest appraisal of our own spiritual mediocrity." I think that's just a gem of a quote. The fear of martyrdom is the start of an honest appraisal of our own spiritual mediocrity. So here's my question. How can Orthodox and Catholic Christians grow out of spiritual mediocrity into spiritual maturity? And how will they know when they're actually growing?
Well, that the statement or the quote you gave comes from my experience as a bishop. We, as in the Roman tradition, we celebrate confirmation after baptism, not with baptism, as you do. And so we had this practice of questioning those candidates for confirmation prior to the celebration of the sacrament. And back when I was a kid, if the bishop asked us, how many of you would be willing to be martyrs, everybody would raise his hand or her hand. Everybody. And there was no exception,
Right.
I don't know that we would have done it, but we said we wanted to and believed it.
Right.
When I asked that question, would you be willing to die for the faith? Most kids today in the Roman Catholic community said they don't know if they would do that or not. I mean, that's their starting point. It's very different from our starting point. Our starting point was enthusiastic, yes, and then probably when we got older, we wouldn't actually do it, maybe. But now they don't even start off with an enthusiastic yes. So it's really a worrisome kind of situation, and it reveals something about the state of our culture. There aren't many things, if anything, that people are willing to die for, even young people, in a kind of romantic kind of way that was so common to my generation. So how do we move from that kind of lack of commitment to real commitment? Well, of course, the grace of God is what moves us towards anything that's good, so we have to depend on that. Good preaching, of course, is really an important thing, and I think that those of us who are called to preach have to be willing to prepare or hold on more. That's one way we can sacrifice ourselves in the service of the gospel. But I'm absolutely convinced that in our time, the only way we can move from indifference to commitment is by living in a community of faith where we're with other people who believe what we believe and then carry us and push us to be faithful to what we say. It used to be that in the early days of the church, before the divisions in Christianity, that the church communities were very small, and it was obvious that they were dependent on one another. And good example, especially in the age of the martyrs, they constantly needed the witness of one another. But as time's gone on and Christianity became cheap, you didn't have to do much to become a Christian. People talked a lot but didn't practice very much. And in the Roman Catholic Church, unfortunately, at least in much of the United States, our parishes are so big that they're not really Christian communities. They're places where you go to Mass or the Divine Liturgy. They're not really places where you come to know faith and then share it. And then when you're fading, you depend on people to call you back. And I think we just need one another. I don't know if you noticed it, but at the dedication to the book, in all four of my books, I've dedicated different books to different people, to my parents and others, that are important to me. But at the beginning of the book, I have a page where I say, for all the Sams, the gratitude and friendship. Right. And that refers to The Lord of the Rings, the book by J.R.R. Tolkien. I don't know if you saw the movies or read the book, but
yes.
There was kind of the main character is Frodo Baggins, but his sidekick name is Samwise Gamgee, and Sam is in some ways the real hero from my point of view, because he accompanied the main character Frodo on the journey, and every time Frodo got weak, Sam would push him, and even one time would carry him. And I think that's really what's essential in our time, that we all have Sams in our life who push us when we're cowards and carry us when we're weak. And then it's really important for us to be Sams for others, and beginning with your spouse, of course, and then parents with your children. But I think all of us as adults need companions who are really believers if we're going to be believers. So we need to do it together. Salvation only comes individually, but it comes in the context of community. We're not saved by ourselves. We're saved together.
Do you think the internet has weakened the sense of community, where people have the world at their fingertips and they have their phones, and they have replaced this interpersonal communion with one another with the internet? Do you think that that's really maybe one of the larger causes of this breakdown of community?
It certainly has. I don't know if you've seen those studies from Japan, but there's very few young men getting married in Japan. They'd rather not get married because they find it more convenient to have relationships online than with real people. I mean, it's become a tragic situation there. And I think that it's true here too, that people have fewer friends, and the pandemic that we've experienced for the last 14 or 15 months has been an experience of that, where, we've really given up a lot of real relationships, and we're going to find that people don't want to go back. I mean, we all kind of say we want to go back, but it's much harder to actually live together in community than just dream about doing it. So it'll be interesting to see what impact that has had. And we've become more and more deeply attached to the internet in this period of time too.
Right. Exactly. And I know, a lot of our parishes have really felt the pinch in terms of people not necessarily all wanting to come back. Things are starting to feel a little bit more normal, but there's still quite a few people that are somewhat disconnected out of fear, or whether that's rational or not. 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. Your Excellency, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about the themes of your book. You're listening to Ancient Faith Today. You'll be right back.
Father Tom will be back in a moment. In the meantime, the lines are open at 855-237-2346. Don't go away.
It began in 2004 with one streaming station playing Orthodox hymns and chants in many different languages, and a few talk programs and lectures as we could find them. About 10 years later, we added a talk channel and made the music channel, well, all music. Today, I'm pleased to announce a third streaming channel on Ancient Faith Radio, introducing the English Language Music Channel. You now have 3 choices on the Ancient Faith app and website. Share the good news with your friends and family. And as always, thanks so much for your financial support that makes it all possible.
Back with Ancient Faith Today and Father Tom Soroka. Give us a call at 855-237-2346. Here once again is Father Tom.
We are back, and we're having a discussion with the Most Reverend Charles Chaput, Archbishop Emeritus of Philadelphia, the Roman Catholic Church in Philadelphia. Archbishop Chaput, we were talking about friendship and the bonds of friendship. There is also this idea of love, and you bring up in your book this phrase that came out in terms of it was the battle cry of many liberals regarding gay marriage, and it was love wins. And you say, the most telling feature of our era is that it weakens bonds. It curves us in upon ourselves. It seduces us to live without love. So, in your view, what is authentic love versus the meaning of love when it's used in phrases like love wins?
Well, love is a word we throw around pretty easily these days, without really committing ourselves to the relationship as it stands for. Traditionally, there's different levels of love, beginning with empathy, where we kind of feel with someone else the pain that they're going through or whatever they're experiencing. Then there's the love of friendship. The Greek word is philia. Which is, it's a wonderful thing. Without friendship, as I was saying earlier, we wouldn't really be able to live our Christian lives. And then a deeper kind of friendship or love would be eros, which is a relationship of romantic love that draws us into marriage and into the procreation of new life. It's, kind of participation in the creative power of God and the unity or Trinity. But the highest form of love even goes beyond that, agape, which is selfless love. That means there's nothing in it for ourselves. It's sacrificial love. It's, the love that Jesus showed us when he died on the cross. And the goal of Christian life is to embrace that way of loving, an unselfish kind of way. And, when the world around us says it's all about love or whatever, they're really talking about probably empathy or maybe even eros, but that self-giving love that is not thoughtful of oneself. it's supernatural, really, because it's participation in the life of the Holy Trinity, and that's the aim of Christian life, to become so much like Jesus that we actually love as He loves. And that's what He told us to do. His great commandment is to love one another as I have loved you, not as you want to or as the culture tells you to, but as I have loved you. And it's always that absolute self-giving love that's embodied by Jesus. It's important for us to embrace.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. So also, obviously, you said that, you're sort of looking into the future, and you're saying your future is not going to be as long as your past. And you speak about death. You say, too often today, many of us do not know how to die, which kind of made me chuckle a little bit, because of course you only get one chance to die. But I certainly understand what you mean, that, that this is something that we have to prepare for, and both spiritually and mentally. You say the sacred sense of passage our culture once attached to death no longer exists, but our fear and anxiety have never been stronger. So here's my question. How can traditional Christians develop an appropriate sense of death and dying? And if you can, give me some examples of what you see in the culture today that shows that there is no longer this sacred sense of passage to the afterlife.
Well, even in the Roman Catholic Church, we're seeing signs of this. Again, a few years ago, the practice of a long wait before a funeral was very common in Catholic communities. Maybe you have 2 or 3 days of visiting with the family at the side of the dead body in the funeral home or in the person's home before the funeral. And now, in Philadelphia, that visitations in some places have been reduced 2 hours in the morning of the day of the funeral in the church. And we run from death. Cremation has become so common now that children don't see their deceased grandparents or uncles or brothers or sisters or whatever. And I'm firmly convinced that the only way we're really, really going to learn to die is to not be afraid of being with other people when they die. We actually learn from their dying how to die ourselves. I was blessed to be present for the death of my mother, and it was one of the deepest spiritual experiences I've ever had in my life. And I think that it really did help me not to be afraid of death and to, in some ways, look forward to it. And I just encourage parents, and I would encourage any of the parents who might be listening, to talk to their children about death and go to cemeteries. It used to be that everyone would go to cemetery quite often, and visit the graves of their relatives, and now people don't do that anymore. So that we run from death, and we dispose of bodies, and we pretend that it doesn't really happen. And if we're running, we're not going to actually be able to practice, prepare for death ourselves. So I think the best way to prepare for death is not to be afraid to face the death that we see around us, and family and friends and neighbors and fellow parishioners and the like.
Indeed. Your Excellency, I want to ask you a question, and please forgive me. I don't want this program to be, polemical in any way, but there was something that always struck me. And given your answer, I do want to ask you this. This is maybe even just a somewhat of a personal question, but I think now that you're retired, you can probably speak a little bit more freely. As an Orthodox priest, Orthodox Christians are very strict about we do not permit any cremation at all. So this is in the same vein as what we were talking about. And I was quite surprised that the Roman Catholic Church, seems to, at least, please correct me if I'm wrong, permitting cremation. Do you feel that maybe this went a little bit too far? in terms of contributing to this sacred sense of passage, which you say is being lost in our culture?
Not just a little bit too far, it went way too far. And when we made this change, we put a lot of barriers around it. For example, there was an insistence that the body be present for the funeral, and cremation would take place only after the funeral. And it wasn't the preferred way. It was just an exceptional way in some circumstances. And what we're finding is that nobody pays attention to that anymore. The body shows up in a little box rather than the full body at funerals. And even priests are doing this now. It's so often the case when you make a concession, pretty soon all the exceptions become the rule, and we've lost control of it. So I think this was a big mistake, really. I think in some places, I guess it was necessary, or they thought it was necessary because of the lack of burial spaces and the like. And I think, also we're just giving into the fact that people wanted cremation, so the church finally said it's okay. The reason the Roman Church anyway, forbade it initially was because it was an act to deny the resurrection of the body. And I think that the Roman Catholic Church came to see that, well, it isn't necessarily an act that does that, and therefore it would be allowed. But I think it was a big mistake.
Yeah, our own view is, of course, about the resurrection, but also just in imitation of the Lord, as well as the biblical understanding of burning a body and what that really implies, which is not an honorable way to honor the body, which is the temple of the Holy Spirit and so forth. So thank you for your honesty on that. I really appreciate it very much. 1-855-AF-RADIO if you'd like to ask a question of Archbishop Chaput. Would love to hear from you. Your Excellency, so in chapter 3, it's called The Waters of Casablanca. And so you talk about your love for the movies and for the movie Casablanca. You speak about the need to unlearn the appetite for humiliating one's enemies. And this really struck a chord with me because I will be honest with you, and I've been very outspoken about this. We Orthodox Christians have a certain portion of the population that are very active online and quite toxic and quite argumentative. And in fact, unfortunately, we've almost sort of become known for that. And people have said, well, I'm not going to join that church because of the way these people behave. So, in the bigger sense, we have seen in our country the last few years this increased in heated political discourse. We've had riots on both sides of the political spectrum, right? So here's my question about politics. Should Orthodox and Catholic Christians participate in politics? Is it possible to do so in a civilized way? And if you could unpack this a little bit, because I know you have very strong feelings about, political discourse and the politics of the land. So help me understand how you approach politics from a Roman Catholic leadership point of view.
If Catholic Democrats had been faithful to what they believed, we wouldn't have abortion legalized in the United States today. If they took their proper role in politics, by the way they voted, the way they supported candidates, and I think most significantly, if they'd run for office. So I really do think we owe it to the country to try to take over, not to impose our faith, but to oppose bad things. And so I really do believe in an active political life. There was a time when we could have been successful, then we didn't take it, and we haven't been. I think it's very hard today to run for office as a serious Christian and get elected unless you lie, and that's never a good thing to do. So I think it's really Diognetus, who was one of the early writers in the church in the 2nd century, referred to Christians as the soul of the earth, of the world. And if we don't perform that function, the world doesn't have a soul. So it's really a dangerous thing. There's a movement, again, it's called the Benedict option, which is to kind of withdraw and not to be active politically. I think withdrawing has always been a good thing, going to the deserts, the Desert Fathers, and the women who did that also were examples to us. And we've, in all our traditions, we've done that. We've gone on retreats. We've supported homeschooling. We had our own Catholic school system in the United States to protect the kids from the Protestants, who wanted to enforce a different list of biblical books on them. So we've always had a custom of kind of withdrawing, but it should always be for the purpose of getting stronger and come back, and to become involved. I actually wrote a book on this, Surrender Under Caesar, so it's difficult for me to answer in a brief amount of time. But
we'll have you back for that one, because I would love to hear about it.
I'm less optimistic today about our positive impact than I was when I wrote that book 10 years ago, or maybe it's 12 years ago already, when I really thought there was a chance. Things have gotten so much worse in the last 10 years. But the answer isn't withdrawal. The answer is to keep at it and hope that we'll at least make some changes along the way. If we don't, somebody who doesn't believe what we believe is going to take over, and we're going to suffer a lot more than we are already.
Indeed. And in terms of the disposition, because I think that what happens, especially for clergy, I know that, some people really recoil if any priest posts anything or says anything from the AMBO that is remotely political. But, in your experience, you've been quite outspoken about, for instance, the current President Biden and so forth. So do you feel like clergy have a place also in political discourse?
Well, you have to be careful on certain issues, yes, but not so. I don't think we should endorse parties, but we should be against things that are grave sins against humanity or against human dignity or against the common good. And we shouldn't be quiet about those things. If we are quiet, we actually betray the faith that the Lord has given us. And those of us who are clergy have a responsibility to encourage the people of our communities to make an impact politically. So we have to be able to speak the truth. I do think that it's a scandal that our president, who we should pray for because that's what the scripture tells us to do, to pray for political officials, is a scandal. That he's a Roman Catholic who has betrayed his church on the issue of abortion and the meaning of marriage. And I don't think it's appropriate for people who do those kind of things to receive Holy Communion, because to receive Holy Communion is a sign of being in communion with not only the Lord, but also with the church community, and to believe what the church believes. And, there's a lot of heroes in both the Eastern and Western traditions of Christianity, of bishops who took on political leaders, the emperors and the like, and then would get banished from their diocese and come back and then get banished again and the like. So I think that we'd have to deny those wonderful heroes if we say that the clergy shouldn't be involved in politics.
Indeed. Thank you very much for that. I know we only have a few minutes left, Your Excellency. Let me ask you one more quick question. And that is just the idea about looking back at your episcopacy, your service to the church. One of the last chapters that you have is Ecclesia Sua, and you published these responses to a questionnaire that you gave out. It's really fascinating reading. What was maybe your most difficult time as a bishop, and what was your most joyful and memorable moments as a bishop?
My most difficult times have been the last 6 or 8 years, when the church is, even in terms of the leadership of our church, has been uncertain and unclear. It's really been a difficult time for me personally. I think it's been a difficult time for the church. In terms of the joy, it's always preaching Sunday Mass in parishes, which I always preached every Sunday night at the cathedral in my years as a bishop in South Dakota and Colorado, and also here in Pennsylvania, because I love to be with a regular community on a weekly basis. And I always found the celebration of sacraments with the people of the church to be wonderful times. Now, one other thing I just wanted to mention before I go away, because of the upcoming celebration of Easter, is one of the most exciting moments of my life as a bishop was being invited to the Greek Orthodox Cathedral in Denver for the Easter Vigil. You know, it's unfortunate we don't celebrate Easter at the same time, but it's great advantage when you get to go to. I get to go to 2 Easter Vigil services, one in my own cathedral, and one with Metropolitan Isaiah, who is the best singer of the liturgy of any bishop I've ever met. And it was a wonderful experience to celebrate the Easter Vigil with him and his community in Denver one year. And the Orthodox really know how to celebrate Easter. So I have memories of that, happy memories of that. So thank you for that wonderful gift to the whole church.
And please know that if you're ever back in Pittsburgh, we would love to be with you. And Archbishop Chaput, thank you so much for your time this evening. I appreciate you very much. I appreciate your book. We want to encourage everybody to go out and order Things Worth Dying For. We got a question in on the line that said, is it on audio? Yes, it is. You can go out to Amazon and your favorite purveyor of books and order it there. Archbishop Charles Chaput, thank you so much for everything. We appreciate you, and I hope that someday we can have you back on the show. It would be a great honor.
Thank you, Father Tom, and God bless the listeners of Ancient Faith Radio. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Happy Holy Week.
Before I share, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Before I share a few final thoughts, I want to offer again my sincere thanks to Archbishop Charles Chaput, the Emeritus Archbishop of the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Philadelphia. Thank you for Trudy for engineering the program, for everybody that was online. We appreciate you very much. Again, just want to encourage you to pick up this book. As an Orthodox Christian priest, I've been Orthodox all my life. I found nothing in this book that was an impediment to my faith. It was only a great encouragement. And I think that books like this that blend both our understanding of the gospel, our understanding of the church, and then, of course, the sort of political side and the social side of our life, I think are very, very important. I want to read, before we close here, just a little bit of a quote that Archbishop Chaput gives that was written by Pope Benedict. It says this: "We can only encounter God by walking after Jesus. The only way we can see him is by following Jesus, which means walking behind him and thus going along behind God's back. The way that God is seen in this world is by following Christ. Seeing is going, is being on the way for our whole life toward the living God, whereby Jesus Christ, by the entire way that he walked, especially by the paschal mystery of his suffering, death, resurrection, and ascension, presents us with the itinerary." And that's our show for tonight. Remember to like us on Facebook at facebook.com/ancientfaithtoday. Share out our program after that's posted. Give us your feedback. Contact us with any ideas or topics that you might want to hear about. Remember, go to church this week. Have a blessed Holy Week, a blessed Pascha. Join us next Tuesday evening for another edition of Ancient Faith Today. Good night, everybody.
This is Shooting in the Dark. The name of this episode will be no. See, I can't even use a real metaphor. It's not shooting in the dark.
That sounds like a either like a true crime podcast, right? Like, this is Shooting in the Dark, or a like after hours podcast. Like, this is Shooting in the Dark. Well, neither of which are we. So
no, I'm I'm also pretty sure it's like taking a like stab in the dark and like shooting from the hip. So I'm really not sure what I'm shooting at in the dark, but I do feel like that expresses.
This is shooting in the dark, where we get to the bottom of mixed up idioms.
I could be a star on a mixed up idioms podcast.
Do you always mix them up?
Quite good. I am quite good at mixing them up, which is shocking to me because I like words so much, and yet I get to like it coming out of my mouth and I'm like, that is not correct. I sound like English is not my first language, the way I put together idioms sometimes.
Idioms are fascinating.
Yeah.
Like I remember when I was in my French classes in high school, we did like a whole like unit on like idioms, and it's just like when you learn about them in another language that's not your native language, you're like, this literally makes no sense.
Right. And then you start saying the ones that you say all the time and you're like, this also doesn't make sense. But I say it like it does.
I love to teach idioms with my kids because I'll have them like draw a picture. Like, usually have them draw a picture of like what it actually means. Like piece of like the test was a piece of cake, and they draw a picture of themselves like at their desk with